Call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers, December 13th, 2018. All managers are present except Manager Olson and Manager Shackleton. I see no members of the public who wish to speak to the board. Then is there a motion to approve the agenda?
Second.
And a second. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Thank you. We will move to the consent agenda where we have item 5 is approval of the November 15th, 2018 board minutes, and there are no other items. Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
I'll give that one to Manager Brogdon. Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I'm going to ask Manager Loftus to give a report from Operations and Programs Committee meeting first.
Thank you, Madam President. Earlier this evening, we heard from Mr. T.L. Cox, our consultant at Springstead, and also from our district administrator. He gave us a presentation on our employee classification and compensation study that's been worked on this past year. We got to go through some of the detail of the report, and that will be in front of the full board December 20th. Is that the right date, James?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. We did go through that in quite a bit of detail, and we ran out of time. And we meant to get an update on permits from Ms. Showalter. So if we could get that now, we would
Certainly.
appreciate it.
Ms. Showalter.
Thank you, Manager Loftus, President White. I am
going to provide kind of a brief overview of 2 permits that will be brought for board consideration in the coming meetings. The first is on ERS 04 MN 344 tunnel rehabilitation, which is a project that the board has previously heard. So this project is just upstream of Minnehaha Falls, and there are sanitary lines, Met Council sanitary lines that are tunnels that are, one is 40 feet in the bedrock and the other is 80. And in 2015, they proposed reconstruction of the tunnel. At that time, they were going to construct a new tunnel parallel to it and a new regulator vault. To do this, it involved a lot of aquifer dewatering, which was a concern to a number of members of the public due to potential to impact Camp Coldwater Spring, which is protected by state statute. At that time, the board heard a presentation by Met Council on their consultants and numerous concerns. The project was postponed by Met Council and has since been redesigned. They now have quite the creative proposal. So instead of constructing a new tunnel, it'll be rehabilitated by installing a custom-made fiberglass liner in the pipe. So they're going to take the tunnel offline and then scan it and then essentially 3D print a liner for it in 4x6 pieces, which then will be installed inside the tunnel. This is a technology that apparently it has to be done in Scandinavia. So it was quite the creative option, but this way they will be able to avoid any aquifer dewatering. The only disturbance in the bedrock is going to be for 2 ventilation shafts, which are required for OSHA, and to allow the workers installing the liner to breathe fresh air. The existing access shafts are going to be used for workers and materials. And there's no aquifer dewatering involved in those vent shafts. We're able to do pilot drills to find somewhere that was outside of the fractured flow in the aquifer, and then they will be kind of like grouting the pores as they drill. The primary element for the permitting consideration is a temporary conveyance. So this is going to be an above-ground sanitary pipe that travels along the pink and purple lines up there. There's kind of 2 areas of concern for district rules. The first is under the Minnehaha Parkway Bridge, and that's going to involve some floodplain fill. about 5 cubic yards. And then the other is just east of Highway 55. There is a weir, the Hiawatha Weir. And at about that location, they're going to be constructing a temporary bridge. The abutments for that are going to be on existing retaining walls on the creek banks. This is what the rendering of that conveyance looks like. And there's going to be a small amount of floodplain fill with the bridge as well. So they are proposing to meet all of the district rules. So there isn't going to be a variance consideration. But due to the board's previous experience with this permit and the high-profile nature, we've decided to bring it before the Board of Managers. I can take any questions on that. Otherwise, I can also move on to the next permit.
No questions? Go ahead.
All right. The second permit will be brought, as of right now, it'll be the first meeting in January. And it's a restoration of a portion of the shoreline of Lake Nokomis. So on this map, you can see the areas that are colored are the areas of the shoreline that they are proposing to do restoration on. It's going to include a combination of emergent shoreline and buffer plantings. And it'll be before the Board of Managers because they've requested an exception from the minimum buffer width and area requirements. So there is quite a bit of erosion, primarily in access areas along the lake, as well as invasive vegetation. So currently there isn't a whole lot of emergent vegetation, and so they are going to be establishing an emergent zone with like bulrushes and sedges. Additionally, there's going to be invasive species management in the shoreline zone. There's varying widths of shoreline wetland that's primarily reed canary grass and hybrid cattail, and that will be established as native wetland species. And then there also will be upland buffer in areas that are currently turf grass. So these are some of that's kind of the idea that they're going for with this. And there is additionally going to be some riprap put at this point that's experiencing higher than typical erosion. It gets a lot of ice and wave action there. And then the other two elements of the project are 2 stormwater outfalls that are currently scouring quite a bit that are going to be replaced. So the applicant is not meeting the buffer width requirements, but due to the restoration elements of the project, they're proposing to have an exception from the rule instead of a variance. And that is all.
And exception means they can go above and beyond, just
Yes.
not following the rules, but going
Correct.
above and beyond.
That they would get an exception from the provision, but would provide an equal degree or an equivalent degree of water resource protection.
Thank you. You were finished.
Yes, I
Any
am.
questions for Ms. Showalter, Manager Miller?
This is like third time I've seen Lake Nokomis restoration. Is this just Lake Nokomis, or is this area too?
This will just be Lake Nokomis.
Okay. Maybe it's the second time then. But the park board never does what they say they're going to do. You know, they're going to do this, they're going to do that. How do we ensure that they do the plannings and maintenance and everything that they propose in their application?
Yeah, thank you, Manager Miller. We have a different set of tools when we're dealing with public entities instead of private entities. So if the park board were private, we would have a surety and we'd have a declaration. In this case, we will have a maintenance agreement, which is a legal document that we are able to use as an enforcement tool. There would certainly be challenges with that, but we could do that.
Okay.
I have a question about the first one you talked about, and that is just when they're going to be doing the work. Is that winter or summer work?
So that work will, the temporary conveyance will be there for 18 months.
Okay.
So both winter and summer. And they are proposing they're hoping to go out to bid end of January, I believe. And then hopefully starting, I think, in a couple months after that.
Do they have to insulate that temporary pipe?
I don't think that they are necessarily insulating it, but it's quite thick, just to withstand the amount of pressure.
Okay. Thank you. Anything else from Ms. Showalter? Thank you for the update. Appreciate it.
Thank you all.
I didn't have any outside meetings in this last period of time since our last meeting, but I did go to CAC and MAUD, so I'll roll that in here. The Citizens Advisory Committee last night continued its discussion focusing on the rule revisions, and they were talking specifically last night about the enforcement, compliance, that's the word, compliance. So they had good discussions. They talked about categorizing the issues that face the permitting program, mapping out potential high-level solutions, and the CAC will be continuing to work on this through January and February, looking next at the partnership framework and then at solutions and direction. Then they'll be looking at other subject matter for a few months and then coming back to rules with a more defined discussion going on there. So they talked about prioritization framework, how sites are prioritized for inspection, escalation, the systems we have in place to respond to issues of noncompliance, and partnerships, how we work with cities and other natural resource agencies to achieve interim compliance. So they were divided into small groups, talked over these issues, put some stickies up on the poster, and that'll all be part of the discussion going forward. But I wanted to also mention that Jerry Chiradelli in his report wanted to talk about his city, St. Louis Park. And he mentioned, first of all, that his city council had had honored people who put in rain gardens, and a number of those rain gardens were assisted by master water stewards. And it's the 30th anniversary of the consent decree for the Riley Tar Superfund cleanup. So that was,
Been that long?
yeah. That was interesting, too. The next CAC meeting is on January 2nd. I think it's Manager Loftus. Yeah, Manager Loftus. So January 2nd, and they'll, I think, be continuing the first.
2nd or 22nd?
Second. They'll be continuing to meet the first Wednesday of the month.
They can all come to Cozumel if they'd like.
You want a substitute, for sure.
I think they'd want to come with, but
Well-
I'll offline figure out who to
Oh,
switch
sure.
with. I'm happy to go in February.
And I was substituting for Manager Olson last night, so maybe he wants to do it, don't know. The MAUD annual meeting, as you know, Manager Olson and I were the delegates here, and he is in a place where they have open water in December. So he said, just to tell everyone that he thought it was one of the best conferences he'd been to, which is nice to hear. All the resolutions passed, though, with some amendments, particularly to the CARP and the CWC appointments. I'll come back with the actual language. I didn't make time to do that today, sorry. The Legislative Committee for MAUD met yesterday. The board's going to meet the 7th of January and set its legislative priorities. So I'll come back with that. And then during the year, the Resolutions Committee will work on sunset policy and kind of an overarching policy positions document to incorporate resolutions. So that's some of the work ahead. Some of the highlights of the MAUD were a presentation by Becky Christopher, which was so well received that people were taking notes and holding up their iPads and iPhones, taking pictures of the slides she had. So that was wonderful. She talked about balanced urban ecology. Going around the trade show, a number of the engineers were just enthusiastic about the presentation that Tiffany Schaffler had done at the Minnesota Climate Adaptation Conference. Just really over the top. They were so pleased with what they were hearing about the
You're
coordination.
describing engineers?
I am.
Okay.
And they were so excited.
Okay. Just checking.
They, ooh, bad. Anyway, they liked it.
Good.
She was talking, of course, about the partnership with the National Weather Service, and they were very impressed with that partnership. The summer tour will be in the Red River Valley, hopefully not too far north. And that's what I have to say, though. I'd certainly answer questions about anything else.
Thank you for going.
You're welcome.
Congrats to staff. That's great.
The upcoming meeting and event schedule is as printed in Yes, it's printed in the agenda. Adding, of course, we'll change the name here on the January 2nd CAC. And then we move to a public comment opportunity of the 2019 budget and levy. Were there members of the public here, they would be certainly invited to come and make comments. And I wanted to verify with staff that we received no written comments either?
That's correct.
Okay, no written comments either. So that is the end of our public comment period. The next item is 11.1, Resolution 18-119, authorization to enter into a contract with a payroll vendor, and we have Ms. Reynolds.
Thank you, President White. Managers, tonight we're going to be looking at our payroll and asking you to look into it and do a selection of vendors for moving forward, and get my presentation moving up. And, sorry, I have a feeling that maybe my phone going.
We don't hear it.
So the selection of the payroll vendor, we've talked about this in the previous board meetings, and last OPC, not tonight, but in November, we talked about this in greater detail. In the past, we talked about it at another point in time, kind of in conceptual as one of the items that staff was looking into. Currently, our payroll is part of our accounting contract with Redpath. So Redpath completes the payroll utilizing a third-party vendor. Their third-party vendor does not work independently directly with organizations. They only work through a separate accounting firm to do payroll. So they are not an option for the district if we were to look at going directly to a third-party vendor on ourselves that we would be able to utilize. We do have in the current accounting contract the ability to remove that payroll function and to renegotiate the price, because at the point in time when we approved the accounting contract, this was an item that we were thinking about and debating and knowing we would bring it forward to the board in the future as a potential option for the district. So looking at the payroll and kind of the analysis that we've made as far as should we continue with Redpath doing the accounting and doing our payroll, or should we look outside of that? And really the points that brought this around was we were looking at the ability to pull reports, the kind of the information we can get, and the amount of time, effort, and basically the manual processes involved in it, and the amount of errors that unfortunately I'm working with Redpath to correct after payroll's been ran and submitted for payment. So then it's trying to go back in and correct a payroll cycle that's already happened. So the current process, as we have up there, is it's processed through Redpath's third-party vendor. What we are looking into and what we are proposing is to process it through a third-party vendor working directly with the district. So taking the accountant out of the equation, and we would work directly with a third-party vendor to process the payroll. As I kind of say, the second bullet there, it's a manual process that we utilize right now with Redpath. Employees fill out a time card, they submit it to us, we input the data into a spreadsheet, which we send to Redpath. Redpath then takes that data and inputs it into the third-party vendor's process. And then when the payroll is completed, they have to then take that data and input it into the accounting software. Numerous points for error and interpretation of what data went into it and how is it getting processed through. The processes that we looked at and we evaluated provided online processes for employees to keep their time cards online, submit those, online manager approvals, including online manager approval of leave and sick leave and vacation leave requests. And that would also allow for automatic movement of those hours from the time card system into a payroll system to process the payroll, and then an automated process of taking that payroll that's ran and updating it and inputting it directly into the accounting software. Basically taking out a lot of the manual processes and the room for error. So if we approve it and it looks good on the time cards, what should move through should be inaccurate and stay that way. Another benefit that we looked at in this is time cards are currently due on a regular week on a Friday morning, which requires our staff to estimate hours. So we frequently find, R&M staff that's in the field and they realize they're not going to get their work done because their hours estimate that they put in said they had to leave the field by X time. So they may have to hurry up and get back so the employee doesn't have an overage of their hours of what they put on their time card. With the new system, we'd be able to input hours on Monday morning and process our payroll that way. So then they could actually put in actual hours worked, and we don't have to worry about differences and variations in the hours needed. Or even the staff and the permitting staff gets caught on a phone call and they overrun their hours. So if employees are out, another issue we have right now is if their employees are out, we have to, basically the manager has to estimate what their hours were for the week. Did they, what was their sick leave, what was their vacation? This, with the online system, we would have an automated process, and as long as they can get to an internet, whether that's on their computer or on their phone, they would be able to submit time cards. So hopefully
Can I ask a
helping that.
question at this point?
Hold it if you would.
Well, I'm
She's
totally
almost
confused
done.
about the presentation, because I thought we have professionals here, and it sounds like we've got hourly people. How does that work?
Ms. Reynolds?
Thank you, President White. Manager Miller, we have a mixture of exempt employees and non-exempt employees. So our non-exempt employees are on an hourly basis and have to estimate their hours to make sure that if they go over that, typically they put in a 40-hour week, but they do rate overtime or compensatory time, whichever one they choose if they go over the 40 by our policy. So we do have a handful, our research assistants, our permitting assistants, our permitting technicians, just off the top of my head, and a couple of our other individuals are non-exempt, which means they are hourly, or non-exempt, which means they do rate overtime and compensatory time.
Go ahead.
Thank you, President White. As I have indicated, we have limited reporting capability. We get reports every payroll. That is the extent of the reports that we can get. So when I look for overtime reports or compensatory reports to help build out a budget, they cannot provide that. The hours are not broken out and we cannot get those kind of reports. So we do have a greater reporting capability. Also to get a better reporting capability on the hours of leave and vacation. Right now, the reports, you can find it, but it takes a lot of work to kind of to do the computations. So the new systems would have a greater reporting capability. The last piece that we looked at in the analysis of the organizations was the cost. The cost with RedPath in our current process is a higher cost. With more manual processes, the efficiencies are lower and the capabilities are less. With the online systems that we did the analysis of, the cost is less. They're improved automated processes which assist employees and managers. We have greater efficiencies and more capabilities in the systems. Here you can see the vendors that we looked at. As I said, RedPath is our current system. We did ask for demos between Sage and ADP. We did look at other vendors and other options, but when we came down to it, we thought those were the two that would best meet our needs. And as you can see, we look at the annual cost. RedPath is at about $14,600 approximately for the payroll. Payroll with Sage is about $3,500, $1,500, or $1,600 on the time card side. So it's two separate processes, but they all communicate and load together. ADP was the lowest at $2,000 roughly for an annual cost, but we ruled out ADP based on the fact that your processes need to kind of conform to ADP's processes to use them. And unfortunately, it doesn't necessarily match the needs of the district based on our policies and what we have in place. So the district's, our recommendation is that we would go with Sage and work with RedPath to transition payroll from them to Sage as a new third-party vendor for the district's payroll. And like I said, the automated processes and the improved efficiencies and the reduction in costs. So with that, if anybody has any questions, Madam President, I'd be happy to address them. Otherwise,
Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18-119?
So moved.
Manager Becker, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, thank you. Questions or comments? I am happy that there will be a third-party vendor writing the checks. I think that's really important. It looks like a good deal with better efficiency, less irritation, less money. Mr. Whisker?
I should know this, but Kathy, is this an annual contract then that we would renew periodically, or what's the term of the contract, and is there a not-to-exceed amount?
We do is, you could end the contract with them at any point in time. You could roll off of it. You pay per payroll, which is why I have kind of the per month cost, so you could do a better comparison directly with RedPath. But it is a per payroll cost. The setup fees, $325 per payroll, $1,000 for the time card. That's basically your investment in it. And otherwise, you do a per payroll fee, and it's per employee. So this is estimated out at 29 employees. We're actually paying 25 employees right now. So it would be, less than this in our actual cost as of right now. And we could transition it at any point in time.
Thank you.
Anything else? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Item 11.2, Ms. Clark, Resolution 18123. I liked reading this one.
Chair White, Board of Managers, I'm here tonight to request approval of the City of Minneapolis Local Water Management Plan. And I'd also like to introduce Liz Stout, the Water Resources Manager from the City of Minneapolis that is here tonight also.
Welcome, Ms. Stout.
I'll quickly review the Local Water Management Plan review framework and process, which you've heard before, and then summarize the Minneapolis Local Water Management Plan. First, the goals of the 2018 Water Management Plan of Minnehaha Creek are to really position the district as a partner rather than a regulator. And the primary way we're doing that is through coordination plans, which are a required component of local water management plans. And the City of Minneapolis coordination plan is attached and is a very robust and detailed plan which provides the district a lot greater detail and insight on city processes, which will improve coordination in the future. The Local Water Management Plan Review Framework, first we're reviewing statutory requirements outlined in 103B and Minnesota Rules 8410. We're in that looking at land use planning processes, plans, and development regulation and how they support natural resource protection. We're reviewing and creating establishment of district regulatory authority, whether cities are choosing to adopt that or whether the watershed district will continue in other cases to implement Minnehaha Creek rules and the Wetland Conservation Act. And again, we are approving a coordination plan with each community as part of the local water plan, which is a framework for how we work together in the future, and implementation of that framework is kind of the overarching umbrella for how we prioritize district resources, staff, and financial in partnering with communities in the future. Regarding the City of Minneapolis Local Water Management Plan, I'll provide a short orientation of the watershed and then the local plan summary and the areas of coordination with Minneapolis. First, through the Watershed Management Plan, the district established through its balanced urban ecology policy focal geographies where resource issues are complex and there's a multi-jurisdictional partnership needed to address these resources. Our strategy for Lake Minnetonka is focused in the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay subwatershed and the Painter Creek subwatershed. The Minnehaha Creek subwatershed is also an area focused, again containing some of Minnesota's most significant regional recreational resources in Minnehaha Creek and the the Minneapolis chain of lakes. Minneapolis is somewhat of a sub-focus of the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, where again there's locally significant issues that are multi-jurisdictional and complex, and there are regionally significant resources. We have the Minneapolis chain of lakes, Minnehaha Falls, and the nationally renowned Minneapolis Park System. The city of Minneapolis overall is about 58 square miles. Minnehaha Creek Watershed District is a smaller portion of that, about 18 square miles. Other watershed management jurisdictions include the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, which is a large part of the city of Minneapolis, the Bassett Creek Watershed Management Commission, and Shingle Creek Watershed Management Commission. The issues in the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed identified in the district's plan are generally increased nutrients, localized flooding, and disrupted hydrology to Minnehaha Creek, leading to degraded ecological health. These issues are primarily a result of urbanization caused by increased stormwater runoff and alteration of the landscape of the creek and its surrounding wetlands. Management strategies in the watershed's plan are, again, using this focused subwatershed approach, creating an increased local understanding of water resource issues, and working with our partners to manage stormwater, restore the creek corridor, and do that in an integrated way with land use planning. In Minneapolis, there are several examples of ongoing and future partnership opportunities. In 2017, the Board of Managers authorized a memorandum of understanding with the City of Minneapolis and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, which outlined some specific areas of coordination across our jurisdictions. One largely focused on master planning for the Minnehaha Parkway Regional Trail System along Minnehaha Creek. This is over 250 acres and over 5 miles of parkway. The natural resource goals here are integrating riparian improvements, stormwater management, and flood mitigation into the overall master planning process. Other areas of coordination ongoing right now are the FEMA flood repairs, the Hiawatha Golf Course restoration, and then the City of Minneapolis, in addition to identifying these projects in their capital improvement plan, their plan also focused on creating a really detailed system of understanding of sub-watershed issues around catchments within the city. Some of those have been completed and some of those are ongoing. The results of that provide landscape level detail of flooding issues, where then as we coordinate through our memorandum of understanding that, our outlined coordination, we can address these identified issues in a systematic way as land use changes. Again, the coordination plan is quite robust. It recognizes the shared priorities in our memorandum of understanding. It does a really great job of providing increased clarity on regulatory coordination, some of the unique systems and processes in Minneapolis around that, and then a clear articulation of planning processes and guiding policies for management of environmental systems with land use change. The Watershed District will continue to implement its regulatory rules and the Wetland Conservation Act within the City of Minneapolis. Staff's recommendation is approval of the Minneapolis Local Water Management Plan.
Is there a motion? Thank you. Is there a motion to adopt Resolution 18123?
Move approval.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus. Questions or discussion? Manager Miller?
I just got that portion of the central part that comes down into just east of the lakes. That's no longer part of the watershed because of the 35W drainage, storm drainage. Is that what counts for that?
Yes.
Okay. In, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, the city had a huge flood through the backups of the sewers, storm sewers and sanitary sewers. And they built a bunch of ponds, cleared houses and built ponds. Did we participate in that? Or was that just the city's public works department?
Mr. Smith?
I think, Madam President, not that there were legal issues, but I think I'm the only one that was around. There were several large regional ponds. A project near Nicollet and 60th Street would be one example. When you're thinking of maybe along Portland Avenue or
Bloomington and
Bloomington,
yeah,
I
Chicago.
would say most of those were local and did not involve watershed district.
Okay, they were in the watershed though.
Yes,
Okay, good.
that's my recollection.
All right.
Thank
Because that
you.
was a major projects. They cleared
Yes.
out 10, 12 blocks of
Yeah.
housing totally. So, okay.
Thank you for taking on the role of historian.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Do you charge a difference?
Got to get the stopwatch. Any other questions or comments? This was a fun one to read, this packet item, because there's so much great detail and so many things, so many functions that have to be coordinated. I just think it's really wonderful.
Thank you. And
And
I'd
it's-
like to thank Liz Stout and her work at the City of Minneapolis for the attention to detail in the coordination plan and the materials.
We thank you too, Ms. Stout. Anything before we vote? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Thank you. We'll move to the administrator's report.
Yes, President White, managers, Mike has a handout, or at least a draft handout that we'll pass down. We've been working with communications staff to draft what is typically an end-of-the-year publication. This year we've kind of pivoted, and it's more of a look forward than a tally of things that have been accomplished this year. So it's a 2019 look forward, and it's in place of the kind of the former year in review. It starts to integrate some of the budget information. We developed a pretty good budget communications package this year, and just with the timing of other communications, that didn't go out, wasn't broadcast out to elected, so it starts to capture and reuse a lot of the material from that. This will go out the full first week in January, and this is just draft to kind of show you the rough layout and let you know what's coming. I think we're going to try and keep providing regular updates on major milestones for communications and the themes for each throughout the year, so you get kind of a pulse on those before they go out. This one will be going out to elected officials, many of which will be just returning to session. It'll go out to city council, all city councils, city staff, lake associations. This will be something that we use digitally as well. And as I mentioned, this is kind of hits on a number of themes. This one's really focused on partnership, highlights our strategic priorities and our budget for 2019. We'll be doing a mid-year one around mid-year. And that's going to focus more on the responsiveness side of our theme of our strategic priorities, and that'll time up nicely with when we're going out and re-engaging with communities on the responsive side of our capital improvement program. So that's kind of what's coming next. With regards to grant dollars, we were awarded a Conservation Partners Legacy, or CPL, grant from the DNR for restoration work at Arden Park, $25,000 to fund the tree reestablishment plan and shrub planting plan following the buckthorn removal. And that project is one that, as you know, is underway. Had the pre-con meeting this week over at the city. It was held yesterday. Rachel Contracting is going to start mobilizing. There's going to start doing tree removal before Christmas, and then they'll be kind of starting work first weekend in January. We also got a heads up that staff from Bowser is recommending, as part of their public packet to the Bowser board, to award the Watershed District $112,000 in accelerated implementation grant, which is great news for the Long Lake assessment. Kudos to Brian Beck, who decided to take that on in his first couple months here on the job, write that grant application and secures that about $100,000. And that's going to be work with Medina, Long Lake, Orono staff, Long Lake Waters, to really take all the information that we have about the watershed and create an implementation roadmap that the cities can use to identify projects that are a priority and a funding strategy for those projects. So it's a data-driven implementation roadmap. And him and his staff have been meeting with leadership and staff from those three agencies to kind of share information on what Long Lake Waters is doing with regards to CARP assessment and removal, and what the different municipalities are doing and prioritizing. I think it was welcome news that this is the role that we'll be playing, because as you know, they continue to ask what the watershed district is bringing to the table. I know they had a really good meeting in the last couple of weeks, and everybody left very excited, and this is the follow through on that. They'll be happy to know that we've actually got the grant dollars to go ahead and do the work now, so that's great.
Hey, James.
Yes.
Is the grant recipient the water group?
We are the grant recipient.
We are the grant recipient.
So
Okay.
everybody in that watershed is taking different activities and has different priorities, and Long Lake Waters has been asking us for quite a while to participate in carp removals, and our
Yeah.
position has been, we want a comprehensive understanding of the system. If you guys want to go fishing, go right ahead. And so we had a recent meeting where we brought together all the information and just broke down, here's how we think about systems planning, and here's our value add, and here you can be doing these interim activities. And we positioned ourselves as the grantee, and we'll be pulling them together on a regular basis to synthesize that information, develop a report, and basically a integrated roadmap that they can go off and start implementing, and it'll help them pursue other grants to get projects in the ground.
Great.
Yeah, with regards to South Minneapolis, as you know, we continue to meet and discuss the surface groundwater interactions in South Minneapolis, and I think I'd provided a briefing to the board recently that we would be going to meet with the interagency team of Hennepin County, the DNR, Minneapolis Park and Rec Board, and the City of Minneapolis, and the Metropolitan Council now, to go talk about surface water and groundwater interactions around the south side of Nokomis, where people have wet basements, and how all of that surface groundwater hydrology relates to the park board's plans regarding Hiawatha Golf Course. That meeting was called by a citizen group and Representative Wagenius, and there was a lot of questions framed in advance in writing. The technical group got together, provided written responses. And the meeting, as you might expect, was a little bit meandering. It took a couple different twists and turns. And I think I followed up with President White. I talked to Manager Becker about it today, and talked to government relations person Jill Carlson. And I think we'll be taking Representative Wagenius up on an offer to go meet with her individually ahead of session starting, because there continues to be a push for Minnehaha Creek Watershed District to take a leadership role on a larger regional study to study the effects of climate change and changing precipitation patterns and what impact that has on Minneapolis. And so we're going to go have another conversation with Representative Wagenius, and then we'll circle back to the board. In parallel with that, ahead of the meeting that we had this Monday, last Friday, staff had responded to a request from the House Research Department staff person Janelle Taylor, and staff's response is outlined in a packet in front of you. And I think we can reasonably surmise these are questions that have also come from Representative Wagenius regarding the contribution of water from storm sewer outfalls up and down the creek. So you'll find a bunch of information about where the pipes are, the pipe sheds, or analysis of volume contribution up and down Minnehaha Creek from Minnetonka to Minneapolis. And then,
Can I ask a question on that?
sure.
The amount of water coming out of Grays Bay versus the amount of water coming out of the Minneapolis outfalls. Got any feeling about that?
Well, that's a complicated question and kind of gets at the root of the issue, I think, with the residents, because it depends how much it's rained, how much storage there is. Are you talking on an annual basis, a weekly basis? Are we trying to draw down the lake? Are we trying to, manage the flow with draining the grid versus keeping water in the upstream reservoir? And so I think one of the questions that really needs answering is the one that you just asked in a whole bunch of different ways, to really focus in on what impact does Minnehaha Creek really have on local surficial groundwater in the chain of lakes? Because I think there's a whole bunch of issues at play, and oftentimes they get confused or conflated. And with regards to the amount of water coming out of Grays Bay and its impact on something like Nokomis, what we've looked at is it probably has very little impact on those residents because their basements are 20 vertical feet above Minnehaha Creek. But it keeps coming back to show me how much water comes out in each portion of the creek. So we have a lot of that information, and we've been talking to Brian and Chris and communications staff, and you could look at volume, but volume isn't always that telling. If you think about upstream of Grays Bay, you've got a relatively large but undisturbed watershed that has a big basin. So you could get a lot of volume coming out of there every year, but the actual yield is pretty small when you compare it to Hopkins, St. Louis Park. You've got a small watershed that's completely impervious and piped straight to the creek. So if you just looked at volume, there might be a lot of volume coming out of the creek, but the relative impact and stress on the system is probably more acute somewhere like Hopkins, St. Louis Park, and Minneapolis. And that's where the communication kind of breaks down, because there's so many different ways to look at the information. So I don't have there isn't an easy way to just quantify that and say, there's your answer.
Oh, do we have numbers on each outfall in Minneapolis?
We can run numbers for each outfall, and there's a lot of information in the packet that speaks to that. So we've broken down the Minnehaha Creek subwatershed, that 45 square miles, into about 160 minor subwatersheds. We've got the land cover classification for each. We've got the storm, the pipe shed for each. And we know based on different storm events how much volume, approximately based on model runs, will come out of each outfall.
Well, you know, I don't want to start a water war between the 12th and 13th ward, but, you know, most of this water is coming out, or my perception is, most of this water that's causing these floods is coming out of Minneapolis.
It's not that simple, I guess. The issue
Make
with
it that simple,
right.
because, I mean, with some numbers, I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I know we can theorize, but if we have some actual numbers of the outfall, I mean, these are
right.
a lot of pipes, and it's a lot of surface.
Yeah, and the issue is, you know, Minneapolis produces, you know, per unit area, a larger yield of water than perhaps what's coming from upstream, and then there's the timing component and how much it rains and where it rains and how that water stacks, and then the question becomes, so what? How does that surface water runoff impact groundwater 20 vertical feet above Minnehaha Creek? So it does get
But they're
complicated.
claiming excuse me, but they're claiming that the water out of Grays Bay impacts groundwater. But the water coming out of the outfalls of Minneapolis doesn't impact groundwater? I mean, you can't have it both ways. It's either...
Sure. And so one of the things that we're doing right now, we talked to the leadership team across the DNR, Hennepin County, and the different agencies this week to debrief from this meeting. And there's going to be a push in the next 3 or 4 weeks to take the last year of study, including all of the wells that have been put in and new data, and synthesize a series of findings and conclusions that are data-driven. And one specific question that we want to zero in on is, what's the relative impact or contribution from upstream versus local? I mean, conceptually, we've boiled it down to where it's pretty simple, and it's just a hard message to get through to people that your basement's up here, and the creek and all the storm sewer outfalls are down here. And what's happened is we've had, you know, the state climatologist was at this meeting, and he had said it's a salient point, but maybe an unpopular one, that city of Minneapolis is largely built on wetlands. It was built in the midst of a 15-year record drought, which was the best of times. And now we've had 6 years of record-breaking, unprecedented precipitation that all of the models have shown have recharged local superficial groundwater in an area where it's become perched because there's shallow bedrock, and that's forcing that groundwater up. And even at a conceptual level, you don't need to kind of quantify it to understand that the creek's not driving water up 15 to 20 feet.
I understand that, but no, the people that are making the argument that the groundwater outside of Minneapolis, or the surface water outside of Minneapolis, is raising the groundwater level. Well, if that's true, then the surface water in Minneapolis is also raising groundwater. I mean, it doesn't separate when it gets Xerxes Avenue.
Right. And we've tried to put a lot of that information together. There is a water yield map in the packet that kind of shows different relative contributions. And like I said, there's about 15 different ways to show the information. And over time, we may want to choose to move away from kind of a paper format to more of infographic, video, animation, something that kind of speaks more directly to people. But to your point, that team of groundwater experts, the state climatologist, natural resource staff from Hennepin County, public water staff from Minneapolis, and our staff are going to be taking all the information we have and boiling it down into a 5 to 10 page report in the next month, so that if there are hearings done at the legislature or we need to continue engaging with the residents and trying to educate them on where the driver of the issue is coming from, that'll be a really foundational document that tries to cap the last year's worth of work.
Other questions?
That is all I
That
have.
is the end of the report.
That is
Okay.
the end.
Well, thank you very much. May I have a motion to move into closed session for discussion of the redevelopment sale 325 Lake Road property in Hopkins, Minnesota, discussing value of the property for sale.
So move.
Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Rognus, those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?